Yes, alright, July 1st, 2025, 3:17 a.m. Brazilian Standard Time. So they're in Chile, at the Paranal Observatory, where they have, incidentally, excellent equipment in the VLT, the automated systems trigger, and interrupt routine operations. Why? A spot materializes on the frame's periphery. Simply a faint luminous patch that hadn't existed before. Initially, everything proceeded according to standard protocol. You know, preliminary analysis, the most obvious conclusions. Likely a comet. Subsequently, the ridiculous designation 2025, Q1 Atlas. Standard procedure, mundane really. Oh well, cool, a new comet. But less than 48 hours passed. Just 40 hours and 8 minutes. And as we accumulated more data, more telemetry, the enthusiasm in the scientific community somehow very rapidly transformed. Let's say, into collective bewilderment. Because this thing wasn't behaving like a comet. At all. It was violating fundamental principles. Physics represents law. Everything else constitutes recommendations. And this object seemed to treat Kepler's laws as suggestions. Its velocity was insane. Simply beyond limits. Trajectory, yes, hyperbolic. Meaning it arrived from interstellar space. But even for such an object, the numbers didn't add up. And most importantly, most disturbingly, it barely responded to solar gravitation. It's like if you threw a ball and it decided to fly upward. Models simply broke down. This isn't astronomy anymore. This is something fundamental. This changes the rules of engagement. Preliminary orbital calculations revealed an indisputable fact. The object originated from beyond the solar system's boundaries. Official confirmation was published in the International Astronomical Union's Bulletin. 3I Atlas. The third interstellar object ever registered by humanity. For most people, this event would become merely another astronomical curiosity, a line in scientific news feeds. But for researchers who dedicated their lives to studying celestial bodies, a pattern began emerging that was impossible to ignore. This new interstellar wanderer wasn't simply moving along a route from deep space. It was replicating, down to the millimeter, the same complex of anomalies that transformed Oumuamua into an unsolvable puzzle in 2017. Like its predecessor, 3I, Atlas accelerated as it approached the Sun. However, unlike a typical comet, it formed no visible tail that should have served as evidence of its natural motion, caused by sublimation of ices on its surface. Conversely, its tail was so dim that photometers could barely detect it. Yet its acceleration was obvious, strong, and measurable. These discrepancies aren't just scientific curiosities. This represents a direct violation of known comet physics. The first interstellar object, observed in 2017, already confronted the scientific community with a serious dilemma. It presented as an elongated, chaotically rotating body that accelerated without visible gas jets and tail. The most widespread explanation at that time was awkward. We didn't understand what we were facing. Theories emerged from all directions. From conservative assumptions about invisible hydrogen ice sublimation to bold hypotheses that it might be a planetary solar sail. An idea publicly defended by Avi Loeb, a prominent astrophysicist from Harvard. But one isolated case could be dismissed as statistical anomaly, randomness, cosmic noise. Now, with 3I, Atlas's appearance, coincidence ceased seeming so coincidental. If Oumuamua was a whisper, then 3I, Atlas is an echo. And echoes, by definition, imply repetition. They suggest patterns. Less than 2 weeks after primary detection, new observations were conducted using the James Webb Telescope. 2 of its instruments simultaneously recorded an extremely unusual phenomenon. 3I, Atlas wasn't disintegrating like an ordinary comet. Its core showed no clear separation. Instead, continuous flaking was observed, as if its layers were poorly bonded together. Imagine an object composed of sheets layered upon each other, which upon contact with heat begins crumbling like paper charred at the edges. That's exactly what astronomers witnessed. Tiny, random fragments separated from the surface without any system or logic. This wasn't the type of destruction that would indicate gravitational collapse or collision. The material composing 3I, Atlas, also proved non-trivial. Spectrometers revealed composition anomalously poor in water, but rich in volatile metallic elements and unusual traces of complex organic compounds. Nothing that proved technological presence, but sufficient to distinguish it from what could be considered a typical comet. This object behaved like something that refuses to be understood through the lens of familiar concepts. Acceleration without a tail remains the most difficult aspect to explain. Calculations are clear. The force propelling it significantly exceeds what could be caused by natural gas emissions, even if they consisted of extremely light elements like hydrogen. In practice, this compares to observing a car racing uphill without the slightest signs of a working engine. Exhaust or noise? What drives 3I Atlas? This doubt isn't just a technical question. It exposes an existential dilemma. When confronting phenomena that challenge our physical models, we have two paths. Either fit data to existing theories, or muster courage and acknowledge that the theories themselves possibly require revision. But 3I Atlas's problem lies in that it doesn't simply dispute physics. It encroaches on our scientific comfort zone, because deep down, all signs scream about the same thing. We're observing something unnatural. However, acknowledging this means confronting a possibility that most still refuse to seriously consider. For 1,000 years, we've sought answers in the heavens. In 1609, Galileo directed his telescope at the moon. In 1996, Hubble demonstrated the depths of an expanding universe. In 2017, Oumuamua forced us to suspect something. And now in 2025, 3I Atlas compels us to question. Could it be that the universe is trying to show us something? And we simply refuse to see it. This isn't just about orbital physics and spectroscopy. We stand before a possible civilizational watershed. If this object is artificial, then it was constructed. And if it was constructed, then someone created it. But who and why? And most disturbingly, was it created to be seen? Or are we merely accidental witnesses to something that should never have crossed our path? The mystery doesn't end with 3I Atlas's metallic surface. It only begins with what appears to be the emergence of a new class of visitors, where exception became norm and patterns require explanation. Let's immediately examine what happens when science encounters patterns it cannot explain, and why the comparison between 3I Atlas and Oumuamua provokes increasingly uncontrolled debates in the scientific community. Since these two interstellar objects behave impossibly, the correct question is no longer what they represent, but what else awaits us when the unknown collides with reality. The morning after confirmation that 3I Atlas constitutes the third interstellar object discovered by humanity, the news already adorned headlines of world newspapers. But contrary to expectations, no panic followed. There was no global upheaval, no sharp changes in collective behavior. As with Oumuamua, most people saw the headline, read the word comet, and continued with their daily affairs. How can we maintain normal existence, knowing that something arriving from beyond the solar system's boundaries approaches with anomalous acceleration and inexplicable behavior? How do we manage to follow familiar routines, brew coffee, ride the subway, update social media, when the universe throws us puzzles that undermine the foundations of modern scientific knowledge? The answer lies not only in ignorance, but in how our brains are trained to deal with the unknown. In 2017, British artist Luke Jerram created an installation called Museum of the Moon, a detailed scale copy of the lunar surface, exhibited in churches, gymnasiums, and public spaces. The work provoked intense reaction. People were excited and mesmerized. They removed shoes, they wept. It was merely a 20-foot sculpture suspended from the ceiling, but it awakened something primitive, almost spiritual. Now compare this to 3I Atlas. A real object, arriving from beyond Earth's boundaries, challenging known physics laws and demonstrating signs of unnatural structure. And yet, most people felt nothing. This isn't indifference. This is intuitive self-defense. When something contradicts our deep understanding of reality, our first reaction isn't curiosity, but detachment. The brain prefers to ignore, minimize, or transform it into metaphor. And herein lies 3I Atlas's danger. However, in the scientific community, moods differ. No panic exists, but there hangs dense silence like calm before storm. Conferences fill with data. Universities update their computer models. Space agencies quietly mobilize resources. This isn't just curiosity. This is discomfort. Astrophysics is science built on strict equations and decades of observations. Nothing we know today about comet behavior or other wandering objects in space explains what 3I Atlas does. And this places scientists before a serious dilemma. Acknowledge structural defects in current models, or open doors to hypotheses bordering on science fiction. This resembles a doctor confronting a patient with inexplicable symptoms. He either admits his ignorance or fits data to some already known diagnosis. But 3I Atlas won't cooperate. Physicist Paul Davies, in his book, The Eerie Silence, proposed a disconcerting thought. We're prepared to accept messages from outside, but we're not prepared to recognize such messages. Because 3I Atlas might be exactly such a wordless message. An object that exists to be observed, an incomprehensible sign that brings no answers but demands new questions. And here science touches philosophy. When mathematics yields no results, we turn to metaphors. When models cannot provide explanations, we seek narratives. And this is exactly what many astrophysicists, albeit reluctantly, begin doing. They create new ways of comprehending the cosmos, but this comes at a price. We live in a society built on certainty. We're confident the sun will rise, that gravity works, that comets have tails, that objects don't accelerate by themselves, that no one watches us except our social media algorithms. 3I Atlas violates, albeit delicately, all these certainties. Therefore, its impact is quiet but corrosive, like a crack that begins with a small fissure in a concrete column, but over time can threaten the entire building. And most curiously, this crack exists not only in theory, but in how we perceive ourselves as a species. If something or someone somewhere crosses the galaxy even silently, even without apparent intention, then we're not first, not most advanced, and not alone. And this realization changes everything. Have you ever felt that some higher order operates in the world, which we cannot directly touch? The feeling that something exists beyond boundaries, even if invisible, that forces exist which we don't understand, not mythical but real, structural. 3I Atlas introduces us to this. It's akin to the feeling when walking alone at night and realizing you're being watched even without seeing anyone. This primitive anxiety, new noise in the human soul. Are we being followed, tested, or are we simply witnesses to remnants of an extinct civilization that left us unintentional traces? Regardless of which hypothesis proves correct, the essence is that now we know. We're not isolated islands in space, and this changes how we build our homes, our laws, our dreams. Now a generation of children is being born destined to grow up in a different world. In a world where interstellar objects aren't science fiction, but part of news agenda, where natural science teachers will have to answer questions like, "Teacher, who sent it?" Or, "How did it know to fly here?" These questions already resonate in classrooms, internet forums, coffee shops, among friends, and they reflect 3I Atlas's true influence, which lies not in answers it carries, but in questions it forces us to ask. We're experiencing collective maturation, a new stage of civilizational development, and like any growing up, it's accompanied by fear, wonder, and identity crisis. You're watching this video not by chance. Something inside you already recognizes that this topic transcends simple astronomical curiosity, that something deep is happening, that we're in the process of perceptual shift. So if this content affected you in any way, if it made you think, if it caused discomfort or interest, subscribe, not because it helps the channel, but because it helps you stay informed about this investigation. To be not just a viewer, but a participant in the greatest intellectual journey of our time. Like, leave comments, not for statistics, but to create community, because ultimately, the only thing more valuable than knowledge is shared knowledge. To continue, let's delve into the direct collision of two worldviews. Naturally, theories that we're discovering a new class of exotic objects that science hasn't yet comprehended, and artificial theories that 3I Atlas, like Oumuamua, was created. Let's analyze why both hypotheses are equally uncomfortable, Why, regardless of explanation, 3I, Atlas is already shaping future astronomy, biology, and the very concept of what it means to be human. The question now resonating in universities, laboratories, and restless minds. No longer what is this? It sounds like this. How many more will there be? Scientific crossroads. Nature or engineering? The moment 3I, Atlas began reproducing the same anomalous behavioral pattern as Oumuamua, the scientific community found itself before an inevitable fork. The existence of two interstellar objects with non-gravitational acceleration, weak gas emission, and irregular fragmentary structure could no longer be random coincidence. It became necessary to choose research direction, and possible directions are few, all uncomfortable. The first hypothesis to consider is most conservative. Both objects are natural. Originating in distant stellar systems, they were ejected through chaotic interactions with giant planets or binary stars, and now drift aimlessly along hyperbolic trajectories that occasionally intersect our solar system. However, 3I, Atlas's physical behavior continues challenging this simplicity. First hypothesis, invisible comets. In 2020, researchers from Yale University proposed an explanation for Oumuamua's acceleration. It could consist of hydrogen ice that upon sublimation leaves no visible tail. This hypothesis, defended particularly by astrophysicist Darryl Seligman, explains the driving force without requiring engines or technological devices. However, applying the same approach to 3I, Atlas encounters several obstacles. First, there's no direct evidence of hydrogen ice presence on the object. Infrared spectra obtained by James Webb Telescope indicate composition rich in volatile metals and traces of organic compounds, but poor in elements that should easily evaporate. Moreover, hydrogen ice isn't stable under prolonged exposure to interstellar radiation. Modeling shows that over millions of years in deep vacuum, such structures tend to disintegrate. What makes preservation of two objects with similar characteristics across galactic distances unlikely? Can we assume we're observing an exotic type of natural object that our science cannot yet predict? Or are we stretching theory boundaries to preserve unchanged paradigm that refuses to change? Accepting this hypothesis, though elegant from Occam's razor perspective, requires new explanation of something even more complex. Why does the galaxy so frequently eject invisible comets? Second hypothesis, exoplanet fragments. Another theoretical direction, discussed in 2023 at symposium organized by European Southern Observatory, suggested that objects like Oumuamua and 3I, Atlas might be fragments of destroyed exoplanets. The idea is that when colliding with stars, black holes, or each other, planets can disintegrate, forming debris rich in metals and unusual compounds. This hypothesis is fascinating. It offers violent but natural origin for objects of exotic composition. It would explain 3I, Atlas's fragmented structure, its irregular acceleration, and even tail absence if material is sufficiently resistant to solar radiation. However, scale problems arise. If these fragments are common, why didn't we detect them in such quantities before? Moreover, 3I, Atlas's orbital behavior doesn't indicate chaotic or random trajectory, as would be expected from randomly thrown debris. Its trajectory suggests precise vector, clear direction, not random collision trace. Are we really observing cosmic ruins, or is something more organized, more purposeful moving toward us through void? In 2021, publication led by Shmuel Bialy and Avi Loeb from Harvard University revived old hypothesis that some interstellar objects might be technological probes of non-human origin. The article, published in Astrophysical Journal Letters, claimed Oumuamua behaved like damaged solar sail manufactured from ultra-thin material and accelerated by stellar radiation pressure. This hypothesis faced widespread criticism, but since 3I, Atlas repeats the same dynamic deviations, non-gravitational acceleration, tail absence, non-traditional fragmentation, this argument gains strength. We see technical patterns, not thermal ones. Panel detachment, material delamination, water vapor absence, acceleration without visible exhaust. These are signs that collectively recreate expected behavior of degraded technology, not active comet. At this point, the question changes. It's not simply whether this is natural or artificial, but the following. When engineering patterns arise naturally, how can we distinguish them from design? Do we recognize technology only because we project our own methods onto the unknown, or do universal forms of engineering exist that transcend species and therefore leave recognizable traces even across billions of miles? Objects like 3I, Atlas don't emit radio signals, carry no symbols, and don't change course in response to our influence. They aren't spaceships in commonly accepted sense. At best, they're silent messengers or lost remains of something that once had purpose, but that's enough to change everything. Physicist Freeman Dyson said absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, especially when dealing with technologies so advanced they seem indistinguishable from natural phenomena. Absence of direct signals and communication might be intentional or a limitation of our ability to decode formats we don't recognize. How many languages existed before us that we didn't even realize were language? How many artifacts were classified as stones when they were actually capsules? How many patterns do we ignore because we don't know their signals? Actually, debates around 3I, Atlas affect not only astronomers and theoretical physicists, they begin finding resonance in other knowledge fields. Aerospace engineers are already reconsidering feasibility limits of solar sails, ablation shields, and self-destructing materials. Philosophers of consciousness debate whether civilizations sending inert artifacts can transmit values or ideas through form rather than speech. Even theologians in narrow circles begin reasoning about nature of intelligent beings that don't conduct dialogue but pay visits. The boundary between science and speculation narrows when data doesn't align with any satisfactory theory. How to maintain rigor without ignoring anomalies. How to maintain open mind without sliding into sensationalism. It's expected that with data collection development at Vera Rubin Observatory, dozens of interstellar objects will be discovered annually. If most replicate 3I, Atlas, and Oumuamua behavior, current paradigm will collapse not under ideological pressure but statistics. How many anomalously accelerating objects will suffice to end the debate? How many tailless comets must there be for them to stop being exceptions? And most importantly, how far are we prepared to go in reformulating our cosmology? Acknowledging that the universe is full of silent intelligences requires more than just evidence. It requires changing our role in the cosmos. It requires humility, and for many, this is the real obstacle. In the next few minutes, we'll step away from hypotheses and move to civilizational impact question. How our culture, our history, and our conception of humanity change thanks to the possibility that we're no longer alone and, truthfully, are recipients of nonverbal cosmic transmission that has already begun. But we don't yet know how to interpret it, because when space's silence begins making sense, the world we know will never be the same. What has already been ignored? In the archives of the Center for Near-Earth Object Studies, records spanning decades are preserved. Technical reports, orbital curves, spectrometric analyses, reliable data collected by high-precision equipment. But among this wealth of information, there's something that catches the eye of those bold enough to look more carefully. Signs of anomalies existed long before 3I Atlas. In 1983, the IRAS satellite, infrared astronomical satellite, captured an object of unknown origin arriving from deep space. Information partially leaked to Washington Post under headline, Mysterious Object at Solar System's Edge. A wave of speculation followed, after which the topic disappeared from media. Officially, it was misinterpretation, technical artifact. But there are researchers who still doubt such sudden investigation cessation. Why was something so potentially revolutionary so quickly consigned to oblivion? Decades later, in 2014, the U.S. Department of Defense recorded meteorite fall off Papua New Guinea coast. Orbital analysis showed its atmospheric entry velocity corresponded to interstellar origin. The object was classified as CNEOS January 8, 2014. Only in 2022, after years of persistent demands by physicist Avi Loeb, did the U.S. government finally confirm the fragment's interstellar origin. Fragments were collected and rare metallic particles were discovered. And again, the topic disappeared from news. What's common in these stories? All were buried under normalcy's cover. There's something deeply disturbing in acknowledging that the universe visits us not through monumental spaceships or radio signals, but through objects that quietly elude our scientific classification. In his book, Diary of a Black Sun, French astrophysicist Jean-Pierre Petit suggests that the biggest obstacle to scientific progress isn't data absence, but refusal to look at what doesn't fit frameworks. This provocative idea is somewhat difficult to accept, but data exists. A study published in Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society in 2023 analyzed 62 objects with hyperbolic orbits, meaning objects that passed through the solar system but don't belong to it. Of these, at least 8 had anomalies in brightness curves or acceleration. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise alarm. Why didn't this data make newspaper headlines? Because they didn't create scandal, because they brought no explosions, because the universe seems more threatening when it whispers than when it screams. Returning to 3I, Atlas, its fragmentation is irregular. Fragment distribution follows pattern that pre-modeling resembles what space engineers call laminar matrix destruction. The same type of destruction observed in carbon fiber composite materials under thermal overload or prolonged vibration. This observation was made quietly by researchers at Leiden University in Netherlands in Technical Report of Limited Circulation. No conclusion was proposed, only analogy, but as always, impact from precise comparison can be stronger than 1,000 contrived hypotheses. Why does an object from deep space break apart as if composed of layered sheets, not ice and stone as might be expected? Summarizing. Objects with anomalous behavior aren't new. They've been observed for decades. Acceleration without visible cause isn't unique to 3I, Atlas. This was recorded before but misinterpreted. Fragmentation along unnatural patterns was detected but without convincing explanations. Given this, we need to reconsider how we perceive reality. Science isn't only what's published in authoritative journals, it's also what's hidden behind scenes, in forgotten reports, in anomalies rejected by models. Leading media behavior also exacerbates the problem. When 3I, Atlas was confirmed as interstellar object, most headlines called it atypical comet. Word choice was surgically precise. Comet conveys sense of familiar, atypical, suggests small deviation, but still within norm. No mentions of physics law violations, absence of significant tail, or inexplicable acceleration. This narrative shapes public perception. Strange becomes exotic. Anomalous becomes unusual. Impossible gets classified as strange. But truth is that efforts are made, conscious or not, to keep discussion within comprehensible limits. In 2019, amateur astronomers in Japan recorded unusual light emission from Polaris. Light apparently pulsed with constant frequency, but its spectral signature didn't match pulsars or variable stars. For 3 nights, data was transmitted to closed astrophotography forum. After this, the source disappeared. No official investigation was conducted. Why is this important? Because it shows how science decentralization with increasingly accessible telescopes opens new information layers. Layers that don't pass through institutional filters but contain raw and valuable material and consequently get ignored. Carl Sagan in The Demon-Haunted World warned that science, without imagination, becomes sterile technique. But he also cautioned that imagination without rigor turns into superstition. Balance between these extremes is fragile. And 3I, Atlas sits precisely on this threshold. How many scientists abandoned promising research from fear of ridicule? How much data was discarded because it contradicted common sense? How many discoveries were stopped not from lack of evidence, but from excessive caution? In 2025, Vera Rubin Observatory officially began full operation. In just 2 months of scanning, objects with unusual velocities, 3 are on trajectories compatible with extrasolar origin. 2 demonstrate residual non-gravitational acceleration. These figures were quietly included in internal Aura Corporation bulletin, but none were published in major scientific journals. Official explanation: still too early to draw conclusions. But what happens when anomalous data volume exceeds normal data volume? At what point does exception stop being exception? This isn't just an object, this isn't just hypothesis. We're confronting our reality model's fragility. 3. Atlas forces astronomers to rewrite definitions, engineers to reconsider construction possibilities, philosophers to revise scientific thought limits. Meanwhile, a new generation grows up acquainted with these discoveries and seeking answers beyond textbooks. Science remains uncertain, investigative, more human. In 2023, during Princeton lecture, astrophysicist David Kipping stated the next decade's greatest discovery won't be life on another planet, but recognition that someone already visited us, even if we didn't suspect it. This proposition was met with silence in the hall, not from disagreement, but from guilt, because deep down many already know that the extraordinary isn't in the future, it's in the past, and we don't notice it. Next, let's examine existential consequences of this failure. What happens to civilization that discovers it's not first to look at stars, but last to understand what it sees? How should we relate to the thought that we're unwilling listeners to a message sent millennia ago, and only now beginning to realize its existence? End of Central Illusions. In 1609, Galileo Galilei directed a simple telescope skyward and saw craters on the moon, satellites around Jupiter, and spots on the sun. The world was shaken by image accuracy and implications. Earth was no longer center, sky wasn't perfect, cosmos didn't revolve around us. Universe first ceased being stage for human narrative and became autonomous reality indifferent to our beliefs. For centuries later, 3. Atlas offers us new type of deconstruction. More subtle, quieter, but possibly even more disturbing. Because now we possibly no longer constitute center of cosmic consciousness. If intellectually honest, we're no longer alone. Impact of acknowledging this fact won't be felt through sky pyrotechnics or loud headlines. It will be gradual, psychological, deep destruction of cultural foundations on which our civilization held for millennia. 3. Atlas didn't come to destroy us. It came to displace us. And displacement, as history shows, is always a painful process. The idea that we're alone in universe was never just scientific theory, it was existential shield. If there are no others, there's no comparison. If there are no neighbors, there are no expectations. We're first, last only. This gives us comfort. This protects us from insignificance. But presence of object like 3. Atlas, with its technical behavior, irregular structure, and inexplicable acceleration, destroys this safety bubble with surgical precision, not to prove something but to make clear. We understand almost nothing about what crosses our galactic backyard. Ignoring this is easier, but living in ignorance by choice means accepting status of passive observer of reality that no longer belongs to us completely. Psychological impact of this realization is still in embryonic state, but it will come slowly. As with Darwin. As with Copernicus. As happens with everything that pushes humans from their bubble. With fear, with wonder, with loss of center. Contemporary science built its models based on observing patterns. When something deviates from model, there are two paths. Either it's discarded as noise or becomes foundation for new paradigm. 3. Atlas is seed, and everything indicates it has already sprouted. Institutions worldwide already began redirecting funds, telescopes, and computational power to search for interstellar objects. Vera Rubin Observatory has clear goal, identify dozens such bodies annually. This is no longer isolated phenomenon, this is new category. What once was anomaly now became trend. Trends require models, theories, new books, new questions. Astrophysicists will have to deal with materials that behave unlike stones, trajectories not obeying gravity, and structures more resembling engineering than geology. Result will be new type of science, more open, more uncomfortable, more alive. Human civilizations formed under influence of two great myths. Myth of centrality and myth of separation. First states we're center, second that we're isolated. Both collapse. 3. Atlas, as well as Oumuamua and already discovered interstellar fragments, indicate dynamic interconnected universe, possibly populated by agents not sharing our temporal scale, form, or language. But regardless of what they are, important is that they exist. This discovery doesn't require contact, doesn't need radio signals, recognizing traces suffices. Like searching for tracks in forest. You didn't see who passed, but now know you're not alone. This changes everything, from how we build our satellites to how we write our constitutions. Future politicians will have to reckon with fact that humanity isn't sole intelligent force in observable universe. Not most advanced, not most current. Our culture will be forced to choose, resist new narrative or rewrite human history based on new principle. Cosmic continuity. What remains of us? When species discovers it's not alone, it transforms. Its entire symbolic structure must be reconsidered. Its myths, its gods, its fears, its hopes. Nothing escapes this. Impact of acknowledging that interstellar objects with inexplicable behavior cross our solar system isn't something technical, it's philosophical, it's existential. And every person realizing this now bears responsibility. No more denial, responsibility for knowledge. You who went so far, following this investigation, are no longer the same, because now you know and knowledge has price, obligation to see with different eyes. You can continue living as usual, go to work, pay bills, make plans. But somewhere deep down, question will creep in. Who are we really in this much larger scenario we don't yet understand? This is 3I Atlas's true function. Not giving answers, but asking questions. If this video made you think, if content challenged, provoked, or somehow touched you, subscribe to channel. Not for algorithm, but for continuity. Here goal isn't view count, but deeper understanding. Like, comment, share your discomfort, because it's sign you're awake in world that prefers sleep. Together we can create community that doesn't fear unknown, that looks at sky not as ceiling but as mirror. 3I Atlas is an event. It's warning. Human loneliness, cultural, scientific, spiritual, is no longer sustainable. And next arriving interstellar object might not just be detected. It could be understood. And on that day, humanity will cease being civilization gazing at sky. It will become civilization that listened and responded.